Hi, I'm Michael Hudson. I help people unlock the power of their story to create the impact they're here to create. On Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty show today, we're going to talk a bit about the power of story and why letting your story be known is the secret to all impact. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Barron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Barron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. My name is Dov Barron, and I'm here to connect you to your deep greatness. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to take an insider look at the power of stories to solve problems. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular, well, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And of course, we're honored and deeply grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everyone you know. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you are a CEO, a C-suite leader, a sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity at all, you know that we live in a time where leaders are called for transparency, where we're called to be more vulnerable, to be more open. But how do you do that? For most leaders today, that's a challenge. Well, stay tuned because we're about to dig in. Look, there are literally millions of podcasts out there, and thousands of them are focused on business and leadership, but this is the only one that's focused on the soul of leadership, so we're going to dive right into that. There's a call for us, as I said, to be more vulnerable, more open, but in the day-to-day grind of business, how do you take the time to communicate your message? Well, stay tuned because our guest today is Dr. Michael Hudson. He is a keynote speaker, business strategist, message coach. Michael spearheaded 2 major business programs, one at Cornell University, you may have heard of that place, and another at the University of Illinois. Since then, he has moved on to follow his passion in helping experts, entrepreneurs, and executives create impact with their ideas and get their message heard. Michael is the host of Get Your Message Heard podcast. He's the author of a book, Public Speaking Secrets, 52 Ways to Increase Your Impact Every Time You Speak, and is a frequent keynote speaker at conferences and conventions. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Michael Hudson. Welcome,
Outstanding.
sir.
Thank you. Outstanding. I love that.
It's good to have you here, my man. So I'm going to jump in and ask you what may seem like a strange question, particularly on a leadership show, but tell us something that young Michael Hudson hated when he was a kid that he loves today.
Well, the truth is, though, it was speaking in public.
Is that right?
I was petrified. I was the kid that, if the teacher said tomorrow's show and tell day, when I got up the next morning, I did my best to convince my mother I was sick so I didn't have to go to school because I just couldn't bring myself to do that. Now I live for it.
It's a pretty interesting transition, eh? To go from terrified to speak publicly to being the guy who now speaks publicly, but also helps others to do exactly the same.
That's a big part, I think, of why I want to help others, because I know there are so many that there are things that hold us back.
Absolutely.
And there were specific things that held me back and made me that way. I've sort of mapped what I think those are for other people, and I found that over 33 years of working with people, they are there for other people. Yeah. So I work to try to help them alleviate those.
Yeah. And I want to dive into that in a bit, but one of the things we discussed about off air, our previous conversation was that if the label would have existed at the time, you would have been labeled as ADHD.
Yes.
Tell us what that was like for you as a kid. First, let's just
Dove, and being brutal, it was horrible. And horrible in the context that being a verbal processor who understands the world by talking through things, you felt you were constantly being told to sit down and shut up. Mm-hmm. You felt you were constantly being told your ideas have no value. And you suddenly began to question, what's this all about? And not only that, at the same time, you were bored to death. Mm-hmm. You wanted to know what the next thing was. Mm-hmm. You couldn't sit still. And you just get tired of that constant drone of stop, shut up, be quiet, this and that. And ultimately that makes you go inside yourself a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, in my case, and I've shared this with you before, and I don't mind sharing it with your listeners, I had the other unfortunate experience of being raped and molested for almost a year when I was in the ages of 8, 9, and 10. And when you combine that with the other, when someone looks at you and says, if you ever tell anyone, I will kill you, and says that to you multiple times, you pretty much get really quiet.
Right.
So, you go inside and you hunt and you hide and you look for some way out. And that's pretty much what I did for most of my life from that time until I was in my late teens.
So, I too probably would have been classified as ADHD when I was a kid. Certainly was classified with dyslexia and those kinds of things. And I know how to this day, I don't know many people who've read more than I have today. But I know how difficult that was. And particularly, my question to you is, you went on to get a doctoral degree, right? So that's, you're Dr. Michael. And you became an endowed chair in Ivy League universities. How did you talk to us? Because I think there's a lot of leaders out there like us who had challenges at school, who've gone on to do all kinds of incredible things. And moreover, I think there are entrepreneurs and even upcoming leaders who are thinking, this is a real detriment and it's going to hold me back. How did you go from being the ADHD, emotionally shut down kid, withdrawn, to going on to getting a doctoral degree, which means you have to be paying a lot of attention?
Well, paying attention, was fine if I was on my own, though.
Right.
I did it and I don't want to make this sound like I had some scripted plan. It's always a lot prettier looking back than it was when it actually happened.
Yeah.
But what unlocked it for me was story. And story unlocked it for me because right around the time all of that happened, this gentleman came into our school, and his name was John Jimenez. I have since learned that he went around to all the schools in the mid-Atlantic of the U.S. at that time. And John Jimenez was a gentleman who was a recovered heroin addict, or recovering, because he would have been one of those, nobody ever fully recovers. And he told the story of how he started with sniffing glue and then evolved to pills and then marijuana and then ultimately a heroin addiction. He told the painful story of, going through the withdrawal and all of those things. And in the day he relapsed when he found himself on a street corner looking at a house waiting for the family to leave so he could go rob it to get the money he needed for his next fix. Mm-hmm. And Dove, it was the first time in my life I ever remember sitting still and almost mesmerized at the story he was telling. Now, I think there's a side journey for that for me that may or may not be important. But at the same time, I was helping my father, who was he was developing the first drug education program in the state of Delaware. He was a state policeman. And so I was helping him build these display boards, or he was building boards to show what does it look like if your kid's using marijuana? What does it look like if they're using amphetamines? So I think the fact I was being exposed to that at home, then I heard this story and all of a sudden said, oh, wait a minute, I can pay attention. Mm-hmm. Story holds my attention. So what I did was I started reading all the time. And, I lived in the country, Dove, and there are places in the U.S. this was popular. They would take Winnebagos and convert them into libraries.
Yeah.
And they were mobile libraries that came to small communities.
Yeah.
Well, there was a rule on the bookmobile that if you were under the age of 12, you could only have 3 books per visit. And they came every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. My mother begged and pleaded with the woman who drove the bookmobile so I could get 20 books every 2 weeks because that's how much I would read in that time period.
Wow.
Because it was my escape. Right. So I think what happened is the thing that I think happens to a lot of us. That thing that was the source of our biggest pain ends up being the path to our most significant impact.
Absolutely.
Because it's what led me to go start studying and reading and learning, and I would consume any story you'd let me consume. Now, fast forward, Doug, not to belabor the story here, but I end up in graduate school. I'm walking to the first class that I've got to teach, 220 freshmen. I'm teaching freshman economics. I stop at 3 men's rooms and throw up. I walk out of the last one, and I have no idea how I'm going on this stage because I am literally petrified.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I thought of John Jimenez. And it's as though this voice in my head began saying, just tell him a story and teach him a lesson.
Right.
So I'm walking from that men's room, Dove, to the classroom. And in my graduate school program, in my master's degree program, I took a final exam in a course on economics. And when the tests were passed out, I didn't get one back. And then the professor looked at me and said, I need to see you after class. Now, that's not usually a good sign, right?
Not
so
usually.
we go in his office and he hands me the test. And he said, I just want you to look over this and tell me what you see. So not to get into economics here, but you may recall there's a thing called supply and demand curves in economics.
Yes.
I had labeled every curve on the exam backwards. And he said, almost as though I was dyslexic.
Right. That's what I'm thinking. Like, you and me got more in common than we thought.
and he says to me, he says, now read the answers and compare them to the graphs. Because I noticed the graphs right away.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I said, they're right, but they're wrong. He said, that's exactly right. He said, your logic is perfect. You just drew it all backwards, but you explained what you drew.
Mm.
He said, so I'm going to give you a pass on this, and we're not going to worry about it. Just don't ever do it again.
Right.
I remembered that story, Dove, and I walked on the stage, and I was teaching basic supply and demand, and I said, okay, let me tell you how hard this is to understand and how easy it is to mess up. And I told that story.
You told that story.
And for the first time ever, I was semi-comfortable in front of people. By the end of that semester, I was addicted.
So there's an interesting thing here, because you and I are both speakers. There's a couple of places I want to go, but one of the things is, I fully agree with you. I think the most powerful thing of all is story from the platform. And as somebody who has been called a master storyteller myself, and I don't say that to blow smoke up anybody's ass, but to say that I've also heard the other side. And the other side is, we don't give a shit about your story. We care about the impact for us. What is this? Does this mean to us? And that's the fine line that I think a lot of leaders struggle with. They go, okay, Dove, you train people to speak, I train people to speak. And and they probably say, this is great. Now I've got a way to deliver this story. But it's very difficult, especially for the person delivering the story, to see the value for the other person.
Yes.
And to make sure that they get that value. Now, there's one level of value, and I know I don't want to take it away from you, but there's one level of value which is that I see myself in the story. That's value.
Yes.
But that's not value at a level of business.
Right.
So help us understand that.
Well, I think the value in the level of business is that it's the realness, it's the vulnerability, it's the authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
It's that none of us follow leaders that we don't respect in some degree.
Of course.
And we are always looking to know that we're aligned in some way.
Yes.
The power of the leader revealing a vulnerable story, first of all, is the immeasurable of, I'm just like you.
Of course.
I've been down there as well. I know how difficult this is. The second point is it gives a way to focus the conversation on what matters. As you know, one of my passions and beliefs is the way the leader can tell the story of where we're headed matters most. Mm-hmm. Because so many people, you and I both done this. The closer you get to the front line, ironically to some people, the more people want to know where we're going and why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And if the leader can't paint that picture of that transformation, that destination we're seeking, what it's going to look like when we get there, and help me see how it's going to affect me, then I struggle to see why I should be in.
And so that's I'm only point partially. Exactly. That's my point exactly. So in the delivery of stories, particularly vulnerable stories, which I'm very passionate about, it's easy for it to look like, even come across like, the speaker is all about them. And I want you to talk to us and tell us about that shift, because when I tell my story, when you tell your story, there is, quote unquote, a level of heroicism in sharing, even in the vulnerability or the overcoming of a difficulty. And that's enticing and intriguing and even compelling for a while. But everybody's tuned into their favorite radio station, which is WIIFM. What's in it for me, right? And so talk to us about making that shift so that they become the hero. Because I think this is a message that leaders need to get. Because they go to the absolutes. They go, well, nobody wants to know about me. And so, okay, you've taught me into telling the story, but still, here's the evidence. People don't care. They want to be the heroes.
Well, and Dov, I think there's an interesting, important underlying point to what you just said, right? Mm-hmm. When we tell them that, they think we're telling them, go tell your whole story. That's not the point.
No.
Right? The point is, know your story well enough to know where the lesson is that will connect with the person you're speaking to at the time. You know, my mantra is ask, listen, learn, serve. I ask for one reason. I want to understand how you see it. I want to hear the words you use. Where can I spin my story using the words you use so you see you in that same kind of scenario? Because if we make ourselves the hero of the story, you're 100% right. We lose every time.
Every time.
But if we ignore the opportunity to drop a sentence or 3 sentences or a paragraph or even a tag phrase that they all know because they've heard our story before that gives the connection, we lose the opportunity. And to me, we put a lid on our leadership. You know, if we ask first and get the language they use, so when we share our story, we're putting in that context, we listen to what they say and we realize, here's the pain they're having. Here's the experience I had that parallels that. Now, how can I touch that as I go past trying to help them move forward? Mm-hmm. We learn where they're coming from, what they need. Now we get to serve them. And I'm a big believer in servant leadership, that our job as a leader is to point to them where we're going and then get the hell out of their way so they can get us there. Mm-hmm. And encourage, cajole, coach, nudge. And when they're struggling, to say, hey, we've all been there. You know, and to make it the way they need to hear it.
Yes.
So it resonates with them. So your story still is the driver, almost of, if you will, intellectually, right? It's the frame of reference in your head that says, okay, this is a case. I remember when I worked in the warehouse and when I did that. Now, if I go tell them when I worked in the warehouse, I had this boss and he sucked, they're not listening. But if I talk to them, say, so tell me what's going on. And I ask, and I hear what they say. And they say, well, the problem is, you know, he expects too much and we can't get that done all in a shift. Now you're starting to learn. Right? Well, you know, that's interesting. I remember back when I did that. We used to think that all the time, too. How are you guys dealing with it? Now we're in a conversation, right? And so you're using your story to direct the conversation that you're having with the people you lead so you can lead them more effectively. And you can drop in these pieces from time to time that connect you to them so they trust you and therefore will follow you.
It's been said by you, me, and many great leaders that communication is good communication is the root of every good solution. Where do you see that the communication is falling down in leadership today generally?
You know, Dov, it's an oversimplification in one way, but it's that we get too focused because we're trying to do everything faster and do too much. We're not setting strategic direction and saying this is what we don't do and this is what we do. So we get bogged down. We don't have time to paint that vision. We don't tell people where we're going because we all fall back to the operational stuff. We all fall back to the tactical stuff. We all fall back to the comfortable stuff.
Yep.
And we don't do the heavy lifting. You know, we chase business. We chase the wrong business. You've done it. I've done it.
Sure.
Every listener on this call has done it, you know. And when we don't do that, you know, it's not that we can't succeed, but we put a lid on success.
Right.
And we don't We don't engage people the same way. We end up in these lost conversations. If we start decision making, I do a lot of strategic planning facilitation. The core piece of my work there is, your vision story or your destination story. Where are you heading? People love stories about how people transform, especially when they can see how they transform when it happens in the organization they work in. So when we enter a decision process, my whole thing in life, though, is very simple, right? You design the outcome you're seeking, you develop the path to get there, and then you deliver the message that makes it possible.
Yes.
So, it's Stephen Covey, if you will, begin with the end in mind. Yep. To me, the end is the story. What does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it sound like when we actually have achieved this outcome, even for the smallest of problems?
Let's shift back to the personal level of leadership. Okay, let's just come back a little bit on that. Okay. We've been talking about the power of vulnerability in story. One of the things that I've been doing this 30 odd years, you've been doing it a very long time as well. And the conditioning around leaders to be all that in a bag of chips, to have all the answers, to reach higher and higher levels of success and goals and bottom lines and all kinds of stuff. One of the things that I see in leadership, and very few leaders are willing to admit it until they're at a place of no return, or seems like no return, is depression. Mm-hmm. Depression in leadership. I know that you have had personal experience around this, and I'm certain that in your work, in the work you're doing, you've also encountered what I've encountered. Talk to us about depression in leadership and how what it is that you do potentially is of service in helping heal that, bring that to close.
Well, and Dov, I always preface this, my doctorate's not in that, it's in economics. But, sure. But I've discovered there are 5 kinds of critics that get in people's way, right?
Right.
And one is the doubting voice. We've all got that.
Yes.
The doubting voice is that thing says, who am I? How can I step up? Nobody's going to listen. Nobody cares. There's also the vocal critic, though. There's the person who at some point in their life, somebody said something. And, it's always stunning. You've seen it as I have. It's always stunning how it happened in an instant. And it probably wasn't even a 10-word sentence in most cases. And 50 years later, it is still defining that person's path and that person's worldview, and what they see is how far they're allowed to go. Then you have the unfortunate circumstance. They tried it once, it didn't go well, and they've never tried it again. My favorite story about that, we're not going to go into detail on. It's the one kid who shared, just the one person who said, look, I'm going to acknowledge this. And in a very vulnerable situation said, I'm going to acknowledge this. I had the unfortunate circumstance. The first time I had to step to the front of the room as a kid in elementary school, I peed my pants. And he said I would never step to the front of the room again.
Of course.
And he said, to this day, I struggle anytime I have to. Then you have the bad performance, right? They got up and they did it. And it probably wasn't as bad as they think it was. But in their mind, it was horrible. Mm-hmm. They were in a speech class in college and they watched everybody else and they thought they were fantastic. And they're like, geez, I didn't even measure up. Why was I even here? And then you have the one that right now certainly is becoming more exposed. And that's the abuse survivor of some sort.
Right.
I don't say this to attract sympathy or anything. I was adopted, so I had that whole thing going on about that adopted people have where you wonder why. Mm-hmm. Then I was abused, and I had that. And I watch people who have the same kinds of stuff, but they don't. I'll give you a specific story, okay? Guy's a leader, bright guy, talented guy. We're in a meeting one day, and he just changes completely. His demeanor goes to a whole different place because of a sentence that someone spoke, which was asking what was basically an innocent question.
Sure.
So we got to a break, and I said, let's take a walk. And we went up and sat down in his hotel room. We were doing an offsite. And he said, I said, you want to tell me what that's about? And Dove, this kind-hearted, gentle man, suddenly exploded with this vitriolic rant about how it was just like the time Mr. So-and-so did this to me. And we're talking 5-part harmony, all the details of the story, all the feelings he had. And what the person had done was ask a simple question. Now, so you ask the question, how do you help? Well, part of how you help is to discover what are those triggers. Mm-hmm. So, because we've got to manage them, right? So when we finished hearing his story, I said, well, so tell me what he said that triggered that. And he said, well, he's kind of questioning my value, or he's questioning my worth. He's questioning whether I know anything. I said, so when, so we have the conversation, right? So when you feel that way, what do you do? Well, I try not to do what I just did, but a lot of times it just takes over. So what does he do most of the time? He opts out.
Right.
So, for your listeners, one question are there things that happen that you find it makes you opt out and behave differently? And if so, tap into them. Figure out what that driver is. Because here's the reality. Someone who said something to you 30 years ago has zero value in your life today.
Sure.
To allow that to continue, when I first shared my story publicly, it was at an all-staff event for a client, 150 people in the room, and I happened to share that because we were talking about story, and I was talking about your own story and the vulnerability and so forth. At the end of the session, several people came up and talked to me, and one stood off in the corner and watched. As the rest of them moved out and went to lunch, that person approached me. Now, context here, I knew the person because I had worked with the organization for a while. Mm-hmm. Put their arms around me, hugged me, and started crying. When the tears subsided enough I could say what's going on, I said, so what's going on? You have no idea, that's my story. Mm-hmm. She said, and I always thought I wasn't allowed to share that story. And she said, that's why I don't speak up in meetings, because I think I have no value and nothing to offer.
Right.
Dove, this was a 30-plus year employee in a senior leadership position in a solid company.
Yeah.
Now, the bookend on the other side of this, I've got to share, right? I go back 9 months later. I'm working with him in the context I've been working with him on planning. And this person's also all of a sudden talking in meetings. Because here's the point. 90% of what releases people and frees them to do this is recognizing they're not alone. Exactly. They're not the only person who's feeling this. And when they see someone who has gotten past it. So any leader, if you've got that in your past and you're dealing with someone that you can't get to release the potential you see, sometimes that potential is trapped by one of those 5 things.
Yeah, I think your 5 critics outline is really good, and I think it's important for everybody to go through it. And I know it's laid out in your book. And one of the things I want to say around that is, I believe at a base level, leadership is influence. Mm-hmm. But what is that influence? And I've often said that the ability to tell your story is permission. Mm-hmm. It gives permission. And people go, well, permission to piss, whine, moan, and complain? No. It gives permission to remove the secret because, as Bradshaw said back in the 80s, we're only as sick as the secrets we keep, particularly the ones we keep from ourselves. And when once you confront the secret, it unplugs its power enormously. And I've worked with speakers, many speakers I've trained, and they've gone, if I do this, if I get up on stage, I am going to be a bluthering mess when I deliver this. And my answer to them is, yes, you will. The first time. Yeah. And we'll be here and we'll hold you, and that's what happens. And I had people who, were getting up to do a 10-minute presentation, 40 minutes in, are still stuck in that place, and then we go through it again, and we don't remove the truth of it, we just remove the overwhelm of it, and that's the distinction. And I think it's an important part of what you're trying to have people grasp here, is that your story, I know, I fell off, like I've got multiple stories, but one of my stories that I think is in 1990, I fell off a mountain and got smashed to pieces. Mm-hmm. And people say to me, we want to hear that story. And a friend of mine said to me, aren't you sick of that story? And I go, oh, so sick of it. So sick of it. If I think of it right now. But when I deliver it on stage, when I'm connected to where I was and what happened, I'm not sick of it at all. But my ego says, "Ugh, everybody knows this." And the truth is, because I know it, I've said it 10,000 times, but it's not the truth for the other person. And it gives them permission to look at something in their life, as you've well said. So I think that it's powerful in understanding that it's permission, and particularly if, and this is, it's a powerful dichotomy, because shit happens to all of us. And as you pointed out, you went through sexual molestation, and, horrendous things happen. And these things tell us we have no value. And it's that very message that you don't have value that stops you from sharing the story. Yeah. But the truth is, you won't know your value until you share your story. And people go, well, what the frick has that got to do with economics? Everything and nothing. Yeah. Nothing on the surface and everything underneath. And I love that you're doing that. Speak to us about love. Where do you see love? Because for me, love is a vital part of leadership. And I know that where you're coming from with this, that it's got to be inherent in there. Talk to us about love in leadership.
Well, Dov, I think it's got three dimensions, right? One dimension is the loving yourself. And the truth is, on what we're talking about just now, if you don't work through it and you don't tell the story, you said something really key there, right? You have told that story so many times in your head. You understand it. You have mined it for the lessons that it provided for you. You have grasped the learning that came out of it. That is ultimately the only uniqueness any of us have. But until you confront and deal with that, we sort of skimmed over the idea of depression in the last answer, but you're going to experience depression symptoms.
Yes.
That's part of where it comes from, because you haven't figured out what has that story set you up to do. So, the love of yourself, first of all, has got to come into play. And if you haven't gotten to that stage, you're going to compromise yourself. And that may sound judgmental, and I don't mean it to sound like negatively judgmental, but it's a real simple fact. Mm-hmm. And see, here's what happens, right? You can wear the mask and the suit, and you can loathe yourself the entire time.
Absolutely.
I committed career suicide when I was 36 years old because I loathed who I had become, because I wasn't there. I had pushed my story down, completely forgotten about it for almost 30 years, not 30 years, about 25 years, and had just not thought about it. And it was eating me up inside. So I was going to work every day wearing the mask and the suit. Outwardly, everything was great. I'm sitting in an Ivy League institution. I'm holding an endowed chair. I'm running a university-wide program. We're in the press every week. We're raising money. We're serving students. Everything's fantastic. And I hate me because I'm not showing up.
So tell us about that, because, as you know, I work one-on-one as a one-on-one consultant with high-level leaders, and I see this a lot, is they look ivory towered. They've got the Rolls Royce, the Bentley, the top of the end Mercedes, whatever it is. They've got the $5,000 suit. They've got the Rolex. They've got the right house. They bought the wife a new set of tits. They've done all the right things that they should feel spectacular about. They've had the facelift and all those, and they're still privately, not publicly. Publicly, they're very happy and everything's wonderful. Yeah. But privately, there's, at the extreme end, very dark depression. Yeah. And at the other end, just a deep sense of dissatisfaction and lack of fulfillment. And I don't know that they would use the word loathing, but you and I would. Yeah. That something is missing. For our viewers, our listeners, who are tuned in right now, and one of them might be that person, for the millions and millions of people listening over time, if that one's listening, what's your message to that person who has got it all and maybe even feels like, I have no right to complain because I've got everything?
Well, the rude way to say it is figure out what the problem is and solve it. Because there's something there, but the other side of it obviously is that, figure out why, do the introspection. If you need to hire a counselor or a coach or whatever, do it, but acknowledge that the problem is there. Recognize that we're disconnected from who we are, why we're here, our why, our purpose. I loved the work I was doing. And let me tell you the defining moment that really made me realize it.
Good,
And,
that's the point I want to ask.
I can't make you have this moment, right?
No.
But I'm in my office one day and a student walks in, sticks their head in and says, I need to talk to you. I said, okay, how much time do you need? He says, I got a real problem. He said, I probably need about an hour. I said, okay, talk to my assistant, see when she can schedule you. So it was literally 8 or 9 days down the road before I had an open hour on my calendar between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. Mm-hmm. Being as students are wont to do, he gave me a hand gesture as he walked out of my office mumbling, you're supposed to be here for us. Mm-hmm. Now, Dove, I got a PhD for one reason. I wanted to teach. I was now wearing the mask and the suit.
Right.
I was going in the classroom and going through the motions. I was alive when I was there. I was letting that fulfill me for the rest of the time. But when that student left, first thing I did was chase him down the hall and said, wait, we need to talk. And of course, the problem the person had was one of those things I could help him solve in 5 minutes because I've seen it 100 times before.
Sure.
It wasn't nearly as bad as he thought it was. Went back to my office, told my assistant, canceled the rest of my afternoon, and I went in my office. I said, I'm going to evaluate how I'm spending my time. And I took an afternoon, I looked at the last 12 weeks, and I found that I was spending 7% of my time working with students and the rest doing administrivia. That was the day I decided I have to leave. Now, I didn't have the guts to walk.
No.
But my point, and I would actually offer this to someone, if you're experiencing that and you feel like there's a disconnect and you're finding yourself frustrated all the time, or as I was, feeling angry all the time, and you only have one little part of you when you're really alive, and the rest of it's kind of a drudge, track your time and see what's causing you the negative feelings. Where are you feeling unfulfilled? Now, depending on your position in the organization you're in some cases, you'll have the opportunity to extract yourself from those things that you don't want to do because they're not you.
Right.
And you can find ways to get more of what you do, and that you really do love, rather. In some cases, you can't. But until you can get aware of that, and most people don't track how their time is spent, right? You deal with a lot of people, same as I do. You give them a time track exercise, and they go, whoa, that was enlightening. Because they suddenly realize, I didn't know I was losing that much time every week to this or that or the other thing. And I think it's all comes from that disconnect and that displeasure within. And we don't, like you said, we don't think we're allowed to acknowledge it. I have a great life. Look at these people around me. I'm getting success. I'm getting recognition. I'm getting promotions. I'm getting, salary increases. I'm leading the organization. Yeah, but if you're not leading you, because let's face it, leadership is about lead yourself first.
Absolutely.
Then lead your team, then lead your organization. When you stop leading you and there's a disconnect, why keep doing it? It's up to you to figure out what that problem is.
And, I don't know that there's anything that I wouldn't say in there myself. I fully agree with everything you're saying. But I think you said something that's critical is what is that moment for you is the question. For you, it was that moment where the student walked in and flipped you off because you didn't care. For someone, it might be being on the brink of a divorce or bankruptcy or getting fired from an identity-based job. There's all kinds of ways we can come to these moments that I call the fall. We all have those moments, but there's an important piece here that I think is really vital for us to convey, and that is the day of the realization was the day the kid came in, asked, flipped you off, and you wrote a time thing. And you went, okay, what am I doing? How long was it between there and you walking away?
About 6 months.
Right. Now,
and Dove, I think it's a beautiful point you're making. Because just because you identify it doesn't mean you can fix it right away.
And I think that this is something that everybody has got to get. Because people ask me about my fall and they say, it must have changed your life. And I go, hell no. It changed my life in that it debilitated me. I couldn't do shit. But mentally, emotionally, absolutely not. I would constantly say, I'm coming back. Well, I got news for you, kids. There is no back. That's not how evolution works. There's only forward. And that desire to go back, to bring back the old identity is what's going to kill you. And that's what slows down the process. And by the way, Michael, I think the fact that you took 6 months, round of applause, because that is really
short.
It's very fast. Because I know people, I'll give you an example. I can do it because my wife has done it herself publicly. My wife, I am her second husband. And in her first husband, when he proposed and she said yes, she would dream of no being written on walls in blood. And she married him anyway. And she had 2 kids with him, and about, I think it was 7 or 8 years later, she ended up in a divorce, which she saw before she had even gone down the aisle.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't say that to criticize my wife. I just think there's a part of us that's so egoic about being right. Yeah. I mean, when you've gone to university and you've gotten a PhD and then you get to be a prof and then you get to be, an endowed chair in an Ivy League university to go, maybe this is not for me. That takes some large kahunas, my friend. Right?
And that's why I say I committed career suicide, because the thing I was good at was knowing how the system worked, which is not hard to get the system to invite you to leave. And Dov, let me finish the story with this though, to make sure it's, because I don't want to leave people thinking, well, he got out in 6 months, that was blah, 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 because that's true. But guess where I went 6 years later? There is a back. Right? I went back to where I was. Mm-hmm. And I started the business and working and serving a new niche. And as it started to grow, I found myself once again back in that same place where I was taking on work that I didn't love just to take the work on. My ego was involved. Someone would call, can you speak here? I'd say yes. I didn't have criteria for whether it fit or not. I'd just go do it. I'd come home pissed off because I hated the trip and I hated the event. I was in front of the wrong audience, and it took 15 years of running that business. Actually, it didn't take 15 because about 7 years in, I said, hey, I'm not doing this again. Right. I've got to switch things. But when I really got truthful about that, I realized that wasn't where I wanted to be. I wanted to be back in more of a teacher role, a coach role, a servant role of individuals than just organizations. And the organizations where I was working with individuals were the ones where I felt I was doing really great work. Right. The ones where I was, pushing a rope uphill didn't work. So, I think the point I want to make here is be careful of the relapse because identifying it is not enough. The change has to happen inside. Yeah. And the change that didn't happen in me is I didn't deal with the depression that had created. I just masked it for a while. And then when it came back again, it's like, okay, wait a minute. You got to deal with this. Just because a lot of us who are like this, right? We think we've got the answer. Now we're good. Let's move on. Absolutely. And we can move on way before we're ready to move on, right? And that's what's going to pull us back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're very good at conning ourselves into believing we've moved on. And again, it comes back to your story of what happened to you in your childhood. But, people will say stuff to me like, well, that's the past. And I'll say, I got bad news for you. Your past is leaking all over your present. Yeah. Right? Your past is always with you in your present unless you heal it, unless you bring it back. Yeah. And you can't just say, well, that was the past. Yes, but you're dragging it with you into every element. And again, this is to your point, giving it a voice is so powerful. People go, well, what is going to be the point of this? So people find out I was sexually molested. How does that help? And I go, it allows other people to go, oh, I can actually say that, like we talked about permission. But it will help you enormously because the energy, and if you just think of it as an energy source, the energy you put into keeping that repressed inside of you is now available to you to be a better leader in any and every form. And people are like, yeah, I don't know. And then I said, well, just do me a favor. And they go, what? I go, I'll set it up. I'll create the whole form. I'll create the whole framework. But I want you to deliver it just to your executive team. Yeah. Just the executive team. Oh, my God, this could lose my job. I promise you it won't. And if it does, I'll cover your salary for a year. The only reason I'd say that is because never in the world would have to do that, because I ain't sure I'm paying some executive salary for a year. But I know that's not why they'll get fired. If they get fired, it will be for not that.
Yeah.
And they do that, and every single time, oh, thank you. Now we understand. Now we get it. Now that's what's going on. All right, great.
Yeah.
And of course, as you said, somebody comes up and there's tears and there's, compassion, and there's often reciprocity of story, which is very, very powerful.
Well, and it's kind of, it's a form of therapy.
Of course it is.
It's a way that you and I, in the work we do and the people we serve, we can essentially help them do therapy for themselves. Because when you tell the story, it gives you a different context,
Exactly.
and it removes the power that it implicitly is having over you because you're hiding it. Because right now, if you've got the story, you're walking around, you're saying, I doubt myself. I don't think I'm worthy. I can't do this. They're not going to listen to me, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a heck of a burden to carry around every day. I mean, that is just like carrying this whole sack of weight on both hands on your back, and it's just wearing you down. And until you get comfortable that I have let go of that sack, I don't carry it anymore. Even if you never told a story to anybody but yourself, you're going to be further down the path. But when you tell it to others, you change the interaction, you change their perception, you change their understanding. More important, you serve them because there are people sitting there who have one of these 5 critics that is keeping a lid on their performance. And ironically, some of those people whom it's hurting the most are the ones that you think don't have anything wrong going on.
Of course.
Because they're so good at masking and so good at wearing the suit and so good at showing up and following the rules that nobody notices.
So you've talked about this transformation for yourself from the terrified, devalued kid with ADHD to going on to becoming a professor at an Ivy League university, creating a career suicide, and then coming back, repeating the cycle in some ways and realizing that you really wanted to help the individuals. Why do you do what you do? At a base level, I mean, aside from somebody writes a check, which is, we need that to live.
Yeah.
Why do you do what you do?
At a base level, I don't want other people to suffer that pain because that pain is intolerable. That pain is crippling. That, there are lots of ways that symptomatically appears, right? In my case, a lot of it appeared in a history of really bad relationships. It appeared in the form of isolation most of the time.
Yeah.
It appeared in the form of just feeling empty despite the fact, this is an odd story, and I was never preparing to say this, but, I had an evening when I was on the faculty at the University of Illinois where I went to a banquet that, unbeknownst to me, they had invited my parents to drive out from Delaware to the event because I won every single teaching award that I was eligible for in the way academic systems are, right? I went home, they left, and I cried for 2 days because it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't who I was, and it was when the depression started to set in, really, of saying, this is not serving me well. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. And so part of my why is really, I don't want you to experience that. I want to be the guy that at least gives you permission to come whisper in my ear, I've got this issue. This is in my way. The second subtle point of that maybe is that I also want to help people who are here to help others, and they're not able to because they haven't worked through their own stuff yet. And I think there's an opportunity to do that when you get a little more real about what you do.
It's interesting, and I think you'll agree with this. In my work with leaders, one of the things I'll say is, do you believe you're a servant leader? And often they will say yes. And I'll say, and I don't doubt that you are serving. So let me just say that up front.
Right.
And they'll go, okay. And I say, but here's what I want you to know, and you won't like this part. And they go, what? And I go, you're never going to be able to serve to the capacity you can serve from behind a mask.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not possible. So I don't disagree that you're serving, and that's how you manage to keep going. And
yeah.
That's how you manage to keep your strength up and do the things that seem impossible for so many. But you're serving at a fraction of what's possible from behind that mask. And then they go, well, is your mask off? And I go, absolutely not. And they go, what do you mean? because it's a daily, moment-to-moment ritual to keep tearing the mask off. Yeah. It's not you rip it off and, oh, okay, here I am. No. It is on elastic, buddy. It slaps back on the moment you take your attention off it. So you've got to like take it off again and take it off again and take it off when you, at the time when you feel like you most can't. It's very powerful. This you and I are, I mean, I think this is a very important conversation. I want to know, who do you see as a leader that you admire?
Oh, there's a tough one.
Because some leaders are doing it differently, you know that. And some leaders are doing, as you said, the mask, the route, they're following the usual path. Who's a leader who you look at and admire?
The one I'm going to name, no one will know.
It's okay.
But he's a former client, and he's an ongoing client. We just intermittently work together. We're not working together this month. There's a guy named Jeff Banning, and Jeff runs a company called Trinity Transport. And the reason I put Jeff there is that the stated purpose of his company is to constantly improve people's lives to consistently improve people's lives by constantly striving to be our best. And he epitomizes the servant leader. He's worked through the stuff. He walks around every day and he comes to work with one objective in mind. How do I help these people be the best they can be? Because that's how we grow this business and serve the people we're seeking to serve. You also notice from that purpose statement, they can stop doing what they're doing today and go do something else any minute, because the people engaged in the organization are engaged in what? Constantly striving to be the best. They can go be the best at any number of things because he has equipped them differently. Mm-hmm. And I admire the fact that he's got people that they walk on their knees through ground glass for miles just to help the guy. Right. And he doesn't do it he's not the flamboyant, the boisterous. He's just what do you need me to do to help you today?
I believe that leadership, and it's not the truth, it's what I believe. I believe that leadership is an ongoing process of personal growth and professional growth. And I think that oftentimes leaders, particularly new leaders and old embedded leaders, the ones in the middle are much better. But those two groups of leaders tend to think of it as in the upper end. I've been a leader for 35 years. There's nothing to do. And the bottom end is like, I can't ask for help. Right. But I believe leadership is an ongoing process, and I don't believe you're ever there. No, I'm not there. And I've been doing this a very, very long time. For the purpose of our viewers and our listeners, would you be willing to share with us something that you're working on in your life, in your business to evolve you? What's your next level that you're trying to break through to?
Sure, and Dove, in mine, it's really trying to break through to delivering more powerful messages. And this goes back to some things we talked about before we started our interview today. But I'm really comfortable on my feet. One of my talents, and I don't mean this arrogantly, but is that I can pull ideas out of a group and I can synergize those and help them see what they're thinking, but that they can't see. But I still have this passion inside to touch people at a deeper level. Yes. And so I am very actively right now working on how do I do that? How do I get the opportunity? How do I have the message that, there's drive-by impact and there's lasting impact. And, I've always said I don't like drive-by impact, but what I realize is, there's a Japanese Buddhist phrase, satori, which is, instant enlightenment. Mm-hmm. There, the first time I heard Zig Ziglar speak, it was drive-by impact that still lasts today. Mm-hmm. And there's a part of me really wants to reach to that because I believe that's part of who I'm capable of being. And so I'm working really hard right now on developing those skills. And what that's meaning for me is being vulnerable in front of people, doing rehearsals, not just on my own, but with people watching who can give me feedback and input. Yeah. And it's, being comfortable taking my story I've shared here in the podcast, because when you say that in front of a room of people, it's different.
It is.
I had an opportunity recently, I shared with you briefly, that, I was in front of 350 people. One of the things I wanted to test was this. Men don't usually use the word rape. Mm-hmm. If a man describes being sexually abused, they typically would say molested or abused.
That's very true.
And I had a conversation with someone one day that evolved around the idea of, well, don't people who have had that happen to them tend to be people who do it to other people? And, there's a part of you hears that and feels a little judgmental, right, towards you if you've had that happen to you. And I woke up about 3 or 4 days later and I called the person. I said, I have a question. If I was a female and I told you that it happened to me, would you ever think I might do it to somebody else? And the person's answer was, no, of course not. I said, because it would have been called rape. So I said, I'm going to start testing that phrase. Mm. And Dove, I've got to share this. I did it in front of 350 people on a stage in a live coaching session at an event. And when I said raped and molested, this is what the audience did. They just backed away.
Sure.
Now, the coaching I got was to try it again. And this time say, look, what I'm going to share with you may feel a little uncomfortable. I need you to know first that I'm okay. Second, and this was the sort of trying to find the funny in it, I need you to know we're not going to do one of those exercises that makes everybody uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But this is a part of my story I need you to understand. And when I did that, what happened? Everybody leaned in. Now, I wanted to share that story, Doug, because that may be a part of some of the listeners and viewers of this event where they're saying, yeah, I've got my story, but I don't want to share it. Well, when you share it, that leaning in will occur.
Absolutely.
And that leaning in will occur because when you're going to cover the difficult pieces, the things that you may not feel belong, have the courage to just say, look, I'm going to share something with you. It may seem weird for me to share in the boardroom, but I need you to understand this because I believe it's one of those things that is a big part of who I am today and that I'm working on.
That's fabulous.
Or that I think it may connect with you. And so I think giving you permission to set the story up before you tell it may ease the burdensome feel of being able to say that.
Yes, that's very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Michael, as we're coming to our end here, I want to ask you, what is the most practical thing that you hope a leader will take from what you've shared today? What is the thing that you hope that they'll go, okay, I'm going to go do this today?
Dove, I would say very simply, identify what the greatest pain in your life was and figure out what it taught you and what it prepared you to do that you're not now doing. Mm-hmm. Because the source of your greatest pain is the path to your most significant impact. If you had it happen to you, someone else had it happen to them. And, depending on how you want to view the universe, I believe there are people you are leading who need to know that it happened to you so they can unlock what's inside of them. And to me, that's part of how you serve. So find that source of pain, figure out what you learned from it, and then go teach that.
Yeah, it's actually part of my personal philosophy that I teach. And that is, if you want to find your purpose, look behind your pain. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not behind your passion, it's behind your pain. Everybody goes looking to their passion, it's the wrong place. Look to your pain.
Well, and ultimately, I think your pain drives your passion, right? Once you discover the pain, but otherwise, you're wearing the mask and the suit, and you're pretending to be passionate, and it's not honest. The integrity is not there.
This has been a great show, and you've been a fabulous guest, and I really thank you for your openness and your vulnerability and your power of what you've shared. It's vitally important. Please tell our audience where they can find out more about you, what it is you do, and all the resources that you offer.
Well, the easiest way, go to michaelhudson.com/leadloyal, and that's the special page I've set up for you guys. And there's some free things there you can get a hold of. You can get a copy of the summary of the 52 Speaker Secrets book that can give you some tips on how you can engage better every time you step in front of the room. There's a neat little template there, Dove, that can help you sort of develop your presentations faster. So when you start taking this story forward, you can, because like I said earlier, it's about design the outcome, develop the path, deliver the message. And the other thing I invite them to do is there's a link there that they want to set up a 15-minute conversation. I'd love to have a chat with them about how they can sort of shape their message or how they can get more clear on some of the things we've talked about today. So be happy to do that. If they click that link, it'll take them to the scheduling page and we can have that conversation.
That's fabulous, Michael. Well, thank you very much. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you with us, and I want to encourage you, dear listener, to make sure that you don't just listen to the podcast, that you actually do something with it. As always, this has been amazing, and I'm always honored by such amazing guests who have such power and such humanity. I encourage you to go to Michael's site, to go to michaelhudson.com/lead loyal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Lead loyal.
Yes.
/lead loyal. And go and check out the resources. I encourage you to do that. And remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing some of the most successful companies is counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies are often hit by the realization they're spending a fortune on attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have that talent leave them at an alarming rate. If you're sick of putting all our investment and training into your people and to have them leave you, then reach out to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by bringing you back to your deep, soulful purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Well, because you can't outsource authenticity. And remember, get yourself over to matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a www, just matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's free to you as one of our viewers, our listeners, for $197 value. It's absolutely free. Go there and assess yourself in the 5 key areas around leadership. It's going to change everything and allow you to see where your real strengths are. So till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the story in you that you've got repressed, that when you bring it forward, will not only relieve your power, but will empower everyone that you serve. Till next time, this is Dov Baron, and I'm here to connect you to your deep greatness. And I am out.